Have you ever received something so precious from God that you were almost afraid to talk about it? A promise, a healing, a moment so sacred it felt like it belonged only between you and Him. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. This is the story of how Sophie learned that some of God's greatest gifts are not meant to be shared immediately. They are meant to be treasured first, protected first, carried close to the heart until the time is right. This is the story of the woman who knew how to hold a miracle. Have you ever woken up and known, before a single word was spoken, that God had done something? Not a dramatic moment, not a vision or a voice. Just a quiet, settled knowing that something had shifted overnight. That's how this morning began for Sophie. And if you've ever had a morning like that, you know exactly how sacred it feels. Something had changed. She could feel it in the way the morning light looked different, in the way her heart felt lighter than it had in months. God had answered something she had been quietly carrying for a very long time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way He does His best work. She sat with it for a long time, not reaching for her phone, not calling anyone, just sitting with God in the quiet of what He had done. And here's what I want you to notice about this moment, because it's the moment everything in this episode turns on. She didn't share it immediately, she held it, and in holding it, she protected it. But then, as it always does, the temptation arrived, not a bad temptation, not an evil one, just the most natural human impulse in the world. She wanted to tell someone. She wanted someone else to know what God had done. She wanted the miracle witnessed. Can you relate to that feeling? Because most of us can. She thought about Ruth, about her sister, about the women in her online community who had been praying with her for this very thing. Surely they deserved to know. Surely sharing the miracle was the same as giving God the glory, right? It's a question worth sitting with, because the answer is more nuanced than we might think. She remembered something from the last time she had entered God's Word, the lesson of the silent seed, how sharing too soon had cost her weeks of momentum, how the premature applause had replaced the actual work. And she paused. She put the phone down, and she asked God a question she had never thought to ask before. God, is this miracle mine to share right now, or is it mine to treasure first? The question hung in the air of the apartment, and in the silence, the Bible began to glow. Not urgently, not dramatically, softly, warmly. The way an invitation feels when it comes from someone who loves you and has been waiting patiently for you to be ready. This time Sophie didn't hesitate. She had learned that when God opens a door into His Word, you walk through it with everything you have. She reached for the Bible. She held it close. And the golden light wrapped around her and Maya like a warm embrace. The apartment walls dissolved. The golden light swept around them both, warm and certain and full of purpose. Scripture pages swirled like leaves caught in a holy wind. And when the light faded, Sophie and Maya found themselves standing somewhere completely different, somewhere quiet, somewhere ancient, somewhere that smelled of olive wood and lamp oil, and the particular holiness of a night that had changed everything. They were standing on a quiet village street. The night sky above was extraordinary, more stars than Sophie had ever seen. The street was nearly empty. Most people were sleeping, but from inside one small stone house nearby came the warm glow of a lamp, and a sound that stopped Sophie completely in her tracks. The soft, sacred sound of a young woman singing quietly to her newborn child. Sophie moved quietly toward the doorway. and what she saw inside stopped her breath completely. A young woman, barely more than a girl, sat alone by lamplight. She was cradling a newborn baby wrapped in cloth, and her face held an expression that Sophie had never seen on anyone before. Something between wonder and worship, and a deep, protected silence, as if she was holding the most precious thing in the world. Which she was. The shepherds had been there earlier that night. They had arrived breathless, faces still lit with the memory of angels filling the sky, glory, light, a message from heaven that had sent them running through the dark streets to find this very child. And when they found him, they were transformed. They couldn't contain what they had witnessed. They told everyone they passed on the way home, and that was beautiful. Their testimony was real. Their joy was genuine. But Mary did something completely different. While the shepherds testified, Mary treasured. While the shepherds announced, Mary pondered. While the world outside was loud with the news of what God had done, Mary held it close, quietly, privately, protectively. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because there is something in Mary's response that our culture has almost completely lost. The sacred art of treasuring before testifying. Sophie stood in the doorway watching. And here's what I want you to notice about what Mary is doing. She isn't being secretive. She isn't hiding God's miracle out of shame or doubt. She is protecting it. There is a difference between secrecy and sacred protection. Secrecy comes from fear. Sacred protection comes from wisdom, from knowing that some things are too precious to be handed to everyone before they have had time to take root. Have you ever shared something sacred too soon and felt the air go out of it? Have you ever told someone about a miracle God gave you and watched their skepticism or their questions or their unsolicited opinions slowly drain the wonder from it? That's not their fault. That's what happens when we hand holy things to people before they're ready to be held by others. Mary knew something most of us take years to learn. Some miracles need time alone with God before they need witnesses. Then Jesus appeared beside Sophie in the doorway, not as the baby in Mary's arms, but as she had come to know him, gentle, unhurried, present, standing beside her in the way that feels less like an appearance and more like a realization that he was always there. He looked at Mary for a long moment. Then he turned to Sophie with a quiet smile. She didn't post about it, Jesus said softly. And Sophie almost laughed through her tears, because the words were so perfectly placed in time. She didn't call 12 people. She didn't need the world to confirm what heaven had already declared. She knew, and she held it, and in holding it, she protected the most precious thing she had ever been given. There is a time to testify, Jesus continued, and there is a time to treasure. Wisdom knows the difference. Mary's miracle needed roots before it needed an audience. Her yes needed time alone with God before it needed validation from people. The angel had already told her what heaven thought of her. She didn't need anyone else to confirm it. He paused. Neither do you, neither do you. The words landed somewhere deep and specific inside Sophie's chest, like a key turning in a lock she didn't know was there. Because here was the truth she had been circling for months without being able to name it. She had been looking for human confirmation of what God had already confirmed. She had been waiting for people to validate what heaven had already declared. And in doing so, she had been handing holy things to hands that weren't always ready to hold them. Learn from her, Jesus said quietly, nodding toward Mary. Not everything God gives you is meant to be announced. Some things are meant to be pondered, held close, allowed to grow strong in the secret place before they're released into the public one. The miracle doesn't need an audience to be real. Heaven already witnessed it. That is enough. Sophie looked at Mary one last time, and she made a quiet decision in her heart. From now on, she would learn to treasure before she testified. She would learn to hold what God gave her close enough to let it grow strong before she released it into the world. She would learn the sacred art of pondering, of protecting, of trusting that if God declared it, she didn't need anyone else to confirm it. The village faded, the lamplight dissolved into golden light, and Sophie returned home, carrying something she hadn't brought with her. Not a dramatic revelation, not a new calling, just a quiet wisdom. The kind that changes everything about how you live without changing anything you can point to. The kind that Mary carried for 30 years before the world ever knew what she was holding. When Sophie opened her eyes, she was back in her apartment. The Bible open in her lap, the candle still flickering. Maya looking up at her with those warm brown eyes that always knew. And this time, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Sophie didn't reach for her phone. She didn't open an app. She didn't think about who to tell. She just sat, in the presence of what God had done and what He had shown her. And it was enough. She opened her journal, and instead of writing about what she was going to do or who she was going to tell, she simply wrote down what God had done, privately, just for her, just between her and the God who had been faithful when nobody was watching. And in that quiet act of private worship, something shifted. The miracle felt more real than it had all morning, because she had finally stopped performing it and started treasuring it. And here's what I want to give you today. Practically and specifically, before you share the next thing God gives you, pause. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, has this had time alone with God? Second, am I sharing to give God glory or to receive human validation? Third, is the person I'm about to tell someone whose hands are ready to hold something holy? 3 questions. They will change everything about how you steward what God entrusts to you. In the weeks that followed, Sophie began to practice the art of treasuring. When God gave her something precious, a promise, a confirmation, a quiet miracle, she held it first. She let it grow strong in the secret place. She let the roots go deep before she let the branches be seen. And something extraordinary began to happen. The things she treasured became stronger, more certain, more rooted, as if the privacy itself was a form of protection. She also began to notice something about the things she had shared too soon in the past. How the opinions of others had sometimes bent the shape of what God had given her. How the questions had sometimes introduced doubt where there had been certainty. How the excitement of others had sometimes pulled her into performing the miracle instead of living it. Treasuring first wasn't withholding. It was wisdom. It was protecting the seed long enough for it to become a tree. And when the time finally came to share, when God gave her the release to testify, the words came differently. Not from a place of needing to be believed, not from a place of needing validation, but from a place of overflow. From a heart so full of what God had done that the testimony poured out naturally, the way water overflows from a cup that is simply too full to hold any more. That is the difference between premature sharing and genuine testimony. One comes from emptiness seeking to be filled. The other comes from fullness that can no longer be contained. That evening, Sophie sat by her window, watching the city lights come on one by one. And she thought about Mary, about what it must have cost her to stay quiet, to watch the shepherds leave, to hold the most extraordinary miracle in human history close to her heart while the world slept unaware around her. And she understood something she hadn't before. Mary's silence wasn't small. It was one of the greatest acts of faith in the entire Bible. Because faith doesn't always look like declaring. Sometimes faith looks like treasuring. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with what God gives you is hold it close, guard it, let it grow strong in the secret place, and trust that the God who gave it to you doesn't need it confirmed by anyone else to make it real. Mary knew this. And now, so does Sophie. And now, so do you. Months passed, and the things Sophie had quietly treasured began to bloom. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. Surely. The way things always bloom when they've been given time to root properly. And people noticed, not because Sophie had announced anything, but because the fruit was simply undeniable. You can't argue with a harvest. You can only wonder at how it grew. When people asked how she had done it, how things had come together so quietly and so completely, Sophie always gave the same answer. She smiled and she said, "I stopped telling everyone about it, and I started trusting the one who gave it to me." Simple, honest, and more powerful than any announcement she could have made. And here is what I want to leave you with today. The miracle God gave you is real. The promise He spoke over you is real. The calling He placed in you is real. It doesn't need human validation to make it true. Heaven already declared it. The angel already spoke it. God already confirmed it. Your job is not to make people believe it. Your job is to treasure it, protect it. Let it grow strong in the secret place. And trust the God who gave it to you to bring it into the light in His perfect time. Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. And 30 years later, the miracle she had quietly held became the salvation of the entire world. She didn't need anyone to confirm what the angel told her. She just needed to hold it faithfully until the time was right. That's your invitation today. Hold it faithfully, trust the time. The harvest is coming, and it will be worth every quiet moment you spent protecting it. And if you want to continue receiving powerful encouragement every week, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the next episode of Sophie and Maya.